Hey, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everybody. It's Jim from Jim's Coleus. And as promised, we're going to shoot out the video today on how I sow my 600 or so Coleus seeds. Now, as a homeowner, you don't have to obviously sow that many seeds, or depending on how many seeds you want to, how many Coleus you want to grow. But you can apply the system that I do to that, whether you want to grow a dozen or so. Try not to think of the individual Coleus. I grow so many because I design pots, I design hanging baskets, so numerous of them. So I may have 20 hanging baskets. So 20 hanging baskets, I generally use 3 or 4 Coleus per hanging basket. So that's why I grow so many, because I do make so many different plants. And generally my pots consist of between 2 and 4 Coleus, mostly 2 for the designer pots that I do, but I do have regular nursery pots that once the seed pods are grown, that I transfer them into, but that's another video later on. So anyway, you can apply this system that I'm going to show you now to no matter how many Coleus you want to grow. So let's go and take a look. Again, I think in my previous video I mentioned what you're going to need to grow the Coleus. The system I use, the Jiffy pods. Now I'm going to really show you the meat and potatoes on how it actually, how much water to put in the Jiffy pods and so forth, best I can. So let's go take a look. Okay, so these are the Jiffy pods. And again, you don't have to use these. I just find them easiest. When I first started years ago, I used to do what a lot of people do, and you can certainly do it. If you're not going to grow so many Coleus, you can just get yourself some good seed starter potting soil. Make sure it's seed starter soil. Don't use topsoil. Potting soil you can get away with, but I prefer, if you're going to start your seeds in nursery pots, or if you have say you have a couple of pots that you want to grow Coleus in and you want to start your seeds in that pot, you can. Just make sure that you apply the principles, and they're very simple. It's not complicated, but just try to apply, like covering and the moisture and so forth and the light. Make sure you apply those principles to whatever you, whatever medium you're going to use to sow your seeds. And again, I'm getting ahead, but remember, Coleus seeds do not get buried below the surface like traditional seeds. Coleus seeds need to be dropped on the surface of the medium, the soil, pod, what have you, and gently tapped down. Coleus need light, warmth, and moisture to germinate. Do not put your seeds or your pot or whatever in direct sun. Don't let it bake in direct sun. I recommend a plant grow light, and just make sure that you're wherever you store your seed pods or plant, wherever, is at least between 70 and 75. 71 degrees is an ideal temperature. So that's the warmth aspect. So okay, so let's go ahead here. These are, again, these Jiffy pod trays come in different sizes. I have 2 types. This one is a 50 and this is a 72. Again, all these pods are compressed. These trays, 50, 72, take about 10 cups of warm water, not hot, warm water. And you want to make sure, your tray, you have something. These trays come with a plastic covering on the bottom, which actually is the dome. But I put that on the bottom so when I pour the water on, it doesn't leak all over the table. I can't do this outside. I'm in New Jersey, and although it's warm today, I want to make sure I don't lose any water. So I'm going to gently now, although it says to put 10 cups of water in it. I'm going to slowly pour the water in and make sure all of the pods are wet. And it seems like a lot of water. I mean, this is pretty much a 2-quart pitcher. It seems like a lot of water. I'm going to pour half in. I'm going to let it sit a minute. Okay. And then you're going to see these slowly absorb the water. Now again, it looks like a lot of water. That's about half. You're going to let these slowly absorb. And eventually what's going to happen is, I'll show you one here, is you can see they expand. They basically take the water and they expand. So that's why you want to really go slow. Put your water in slowly. Make sure, because you don't want to oversaturate it, because then you have a mess. So I do this slowly. If you have 4 or 5 pods, just slowly add the water in. Let it soak. Make sure they expand. Once they're expanded, you're fine. They shouldn't be drenched. If they are, then let them dry a little bit. But you want to make sure that they expand. Each one expands. Okay, now it only takes a few minutes. As you can see, they're expanding. They're not completely expanded, but they are. But you'll see now the netting starts to open up, and that's eventually, and I'll show this, you're going to gently rip this netting back and fluff out that soil. That's where we're going to plant our seeds. So you can see why I like using this system. This is what I used to use before. I used to get those plastic trays, and I used to just fill them with the seed potting soil. It's seed starter soil, and it was just a mess. I mean, and then you had to add the water and so forth after you planted the seed. These I like because they're moist already. They come with the dome. If you don't have the dome, say you lost a dome or whatever, you can use plastic. Just make sure, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but make sure you cover your pods or your pot, whatever you're growing your seeds in. Make sure you cover them initially to keep the soil moist until they start to germinate, and then we'll, and that's a video we'll do later on. So, but as you can see, these are starting to expand, as opposed to what they, so they're just compressed, and there's your center. They're just compressed peat. These are really good. And again, you can buy these Home Depot, Lowe's. I buy them bulk. So after you buy your first initial tray, and you don't have to use these trays. You can use those plastic Chinese food containers, as long as it holds the pods. Just make sure you slowly pour the water in, and don't over soak them. Okay, so as you can see, I used about 95% of the water. And what I do from here is I look at each one, and these are pretty well, some of these are a little oversaturated. That's why I try to be careful and not, but these are perfect now. There's a few here that have too much water, but there's no water soaked. There's no water sitting at the bottom. So we'll let these sit. So it says 10 cups. So again, slowly add water. And you may, like a few of these, there's a bit too much. So, and again, even someone like me who've done it a few years, I make my boo-boos. So that's a little bit, that's not going to hurt the Coleus. So we'll just let that dry out a little bit. But the rest of them are in good shape. You can see they're expanded, but they're not soaking dry. They're not wet, soaking wet, as opposed to those. Now I just poured some water on those, but this is basically how your pods should look like. They should expand. And again, your next step is to tear back all of your netting. So what I do now, I have this other tray I'm going to do next. I have my paper plate. I purchased these labels, the little arrow labels for whatever type of Coleus I have. And of course, so I know I can keep track of which ones I have growing. If it doesn't matter to you, or you're just growing Coleus, whatever, and you don't really mind, you don't need to do that. And of course, there's my seeds. So I organize, basically, I have an idea of what Coleus I want to grow, how many, and then I go from there. Okay, so they're all pretty well expanded. You may come across a few that maybe got a little less water absorbed. So you can just add the water to them if you want. But as long as they're expanded pretty well. Now there were a few that got oversaturated. It just happens when you're pouring the water, you try to make sure that all of them get even. But it's just part of it. So what I did is I took these are really oversaturated. So I separated them and I took some dry ones. And what I'm going to do here is, you can't put them in here and add water to them because then these are going to get all saturated. So what we do is the ones that you may be oversaturated. Again, I grow so many, so I have so many pods here. I need to do this. So what I do is I just get a separate Tupperware container and I add water. And we let them expand. Once they're expanded, I'll put them onto my tray and then we'll be good to go. All right, now next, I'm gonna open up these pods. Again, they have the netting. You do is you gently rip open the netting. You don't take the netting off. Just gently rip the netting open until you have a nice surface, a nice wide surface. You're making like a little pot, a nice little open pod for you to drop your Coleus seeds on. So let's go, let's take care of that. Okay, so here we are. This is basically how your pods should look. Whether it's 75 or 5. And now if you're not using pods and you're using regular trays or pots, apply it this way. You get your potting mixture or whatever you're using, like these trays here that I used to use. Get your soil in all of them, whatever you're going to be using, and add some water. Don't saturate the soil, but get that soil moist. But again, this is why I like to use these pods, because it makes it very easy to organize. And I have all of these Coleus. Now remember, I grow 4, I generally grow 4 seeds per pod. I don't do any more than that, because then they really get too crowded. And then eventually later on, and we'll do videos later on if you're following along, I will separate them. So I don't generally do more than 4, but I do make mistakes and I'll drop a few extras here and there, so I end up with 4 or 5. But I try to keep it at 4 or 5. So when I'm growing this many, that's why I like these trays. They're very compact and easy to, easy to store in my indoor greenhouse, and they get all the light. And also, all of these pods together keep them all moist. I mean, again, I'm going to have the tray top, but having these pods all together keep everything nice and moist, as opposed to 1 or 2 out next to one another, which will dry out sooner. But again, it's very important that we cover. I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is your next step. Gently tear open these nettings. You can see some of them, you know, and just gently fluff it. You can use your fingers or a little cocktail fork. Just fluff that soil a little bit, because we're going to be doing, what we're going to do next is we're going to decide what seeds. Now I'm doing so many, but you decide what Coleus you want, and you're going to use the paper plates next. I'll show you why I use these white paper plates. Okay, now here's a little an example, as an idea for you. If maybe you're just growing yourself a couple of dozen of Coleus. We all eat Chinese food, I think, most of us, or takeout or whatever. And these are these little Italian or Chinese food or Italian specialty takeout dishes. These are the ones that were a little saturated. I took them out, and I'm gonna use these. I grow some peppers for myself, so I'm gonna use these to grow my peppers. So, and these are great because once you sow your seeds, and we'll get into that later, is you're gonna want to cover this to keep the pods moist, and that will make them germinate. Again, later on we'll get into it, but once they germinate, you want to pop the lid. But for this part, when we're sowing Coleus, when we're done, you want to cover your tray like that. That's why I like the Jiffy pods. Now, if you don't have that, you can use Saran wrap, plastic wrap, but just make sure that the trays are covered completely to keep moisture in. And I'll tell you later on when you pop the top off. Okay, all right, so first we're going to do now, what I do is I get a little paper plate, a little paper towel, and I wet it, because you want to, we're going to plant kaleidoscope. Now, it doesn't matter whatever Coleus you choose to grow. I use a paper plate, and that makes it easier for me to spot the seeds. And I have a little bit of debris. I don't know if that's washed out or not. Okay, so what I do is I organize it. If you come over here and look at this here, you can see I use these little stakes. So I'm just going to do a row of kaleidoscope. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 20 kaleidoscope Coleus. So what I do is here, I wet my finger, I look down here, and you can see very easily the round Coleus seeds. So I wet my finger. It makes it really easy to pick them up. So I got 4 Coleus there. And I just, again, you do not bury your Coleus seeds. You just gently tap them. You can do this with your finger. Just make sure that the Coleus aren't stuck on your finger, and you just make sure and you gently tap the Coleus seeds into the soil. You don't bury them, you just drop them on the surface. So, and that's why a lot of times I'll put 5 in there just in case if one of them gets stuck, but they're off my finger. I basically and this is tedious. When you're doing 600 Coleus, it is tedious. But this is the system that I do. So we're going to the next one. Go on the plate here, and we'll pick out 4 good Coleus seeds, and we'll make it 5. So we got 5, and just keep track. Again, if you're only doing a few at home, this is pretty simple, and you can apply this to whether you're doing pods, a little pot, or what have you. But just make sure whatever you're growing your Coleus in, if you're using a pot, if that's where it's staying, make sure that the pot has drainage holes. So there we go. I'm rolling them off a little bit. They're off my finger, they're on the soil, and I gently pat it down. And I just make sure that the seeds don't get stuck on your finger again. But my fingers aren't soaking wet, they're just damp enough to pick up the Coleus seeds. So all right, we'll go on to the next one. We'll look around. Sometimes I look, and it takes time. It definitely is a tedious thing, but I try to pick out some of the nice, heavy, there's some Coleus seeds that are a little larger than others. So those are pretty well mature. So I'll pick those up, a few of those up. There we go. And just make sure you keep track of what pod you did last, so you don't want to overload it. And kind of spread them out if you can, you know. Spread them out so they're not all on top of each other. You'll feel them on your fingertip. And again, you may find a better, maybe something a little simpler than this. And if you do, if you're making your own and you find a little simpler system, hey, shoot me a comment. I'd love to know. But this is the system I use. I enjoy it, so I don't mind so much. So again, now these are just kaleidoscope Coleus seeds right here. I'll continue with these. They're already grouped pretty much here, so I got 4 or 5. And I feel them fall off. I can see, it's hard to see them. So, but they're in there. They definitely dropped on there. I feel them. Now, for purposes of the videos, I'm kind of I'm slowing this up. Once I get rocking and rolling, I breeze through these pretty fast. So, but this is basically, and remember, do not bury your Coleus seeds. Drop them on top, gently pat down and move on to the next. And just make sure they're not stuck on your finger. All right, a couple here. Okay, pat it down. And that's basically how you do it. Just make sure, again, make sure your pods are moist. Decide what you want to grow, what kind of Coleus. I have many varieties. So I have them organized and I have my labels here. So I decide on what I'm going to do. And once I'm done, if this is done, make sure this is the cover, and you keep this cover on. I'm going to put it in my greenhouse. I'll have my plant grow light on, and I'm going to put the cover on it. I want air to get in there. So what you may find later on, you may get this little, sort of like almost looks like mold. It's like a white film may grow if there's too much water. So you just gently with a little paintbrush. I mean, you may not get that for a while. I think your germinations will show up first before you get that generally, but it's not going to really harm it. I generally pat it away. I'll do a video on that later on. But for purposes of it, once all your seeds are in your pods or wherever you're growing, it's important to make sure you cover it to keep the moisture. Make sure you cover it to keep the moisture in. Once, in about 7 to 10 days, you'll start to see these little green dots. And that's what's exciting. You'll start to see them germinate. Once you clearly see the plants germinate, once you start to actually see plants, then you're going to pop the top off. Just like that. You don't take the pot off. You don't want to take the top off completely. You want to pop the top off to give it air, but you still want to maintain some soil moisture. If you see a couple of pods that are dry, drop a little water on them, and that's fine. Just keep them there. But in general, these pods will maintain the moisture. But if they look dry, just use a small thing to water them, and you should be fine. Okay, here we are. We are done. It took me about 8 hours. I took some breaks, and you know, it's just the planning and so forth. So here it is. This is my indoor greenhouse. It's pretty simple. I got this LED grow light, and these are really great. I got it on, I think I got it on Amazon or eBay, but these are really safe. I posted a video on these. But they're really safe. They use like very little to no electricity, and they provide all of the spectrum, the photosynthesis requirements germinate plants and keep them going. Not all the colors are actually showing on the video, I don't think. But anyway, I have that right above the trays. We'll keep the cover not zipped but closed to keep nice and warm. And I just monitor them every day. Keep an eye out. Now, those earlier ones that those few pods that were drenched, those dried out pretty well over the course of a few hours while I seeded them. So all of the pods have the perfect amount of moisture, not too much. I'd be very surprised if I get any mold growth, but we can deal with that like I've done over the years. I just gently brush the mold. It's like a fuzzy, just a very, very light fuzz that you might see grow over your pod or soil. Just gently use like a gentle model brush, and brush it aside, and that's it. You should be fine. So here we are. So I expect these to germinate pretty quick. I would say within 10 days I will absolutely get germination. So stay tuned. We'll definitely post a video. We'll keep it going for the rest of the season. So I hope you guys are following along, and have good luck. Any questions, comments? Absolutely. I always answer you. So thanks for following along, and let's keep it going for 2020. Thanks for watching Jim's Holiest at Coleus.